Hello and welcome to Scale Stuff. In this week's video I'm going to be building and reviewing the Airfix Vintage Classics 176 scale M3 half-track and trailer. I've been after building one of these kits for ages now, but something else always seemed to crop up first. It'll also be nice to build something American, as without intending to, I seem to have got stuck making only British and German vehicles. In the box you get a full colour instruction guide, a small bag of parts, and the decals to build an M3 half-track used by the Americans during Operation Overlord. A first quick look at the sprues show that there's not much to this kit, so it should be a fairly fast build. As with all the kits in the Classics line, there is a bit of flash and feed ports that will need to be cleaned up, along with some numbers on the bigger parts that will need to be removed. The flash on this model seems pretty minimal though, compared to some of the others I have built from this line. All of this is to be expected from a kit that dates back to 1966. This is a vintage classic kit, after all. This is the 2018 re-release of this old tooling. One thing I've noticed that I am a little concerned by is that some of the smaller details on this kit, like panel lines and rivets, look very fine, and I'm worried that they might get swamped in paint later on. Anyway, onto the build. First thing on the menu is the front axle and wheels. There's a few seam lines on the wheels that need getting, but the main thing here is to make sure you get the right wheels, as the trailer ones and the half-track ones are different sizes. This stage wants me to add the wheels to the front axle, but I'm going to leave them off to make painting them easier later on. Adding the hubcaps to the wheels is a very tight fit though. The centre hubs will need a good cleanup and a firm push to get them into place. Now it's on to building the chassis. There's not much to add here, and this step's pretty simple. The exhausts are a little bit fiddly, but the main thing to sort out on this stage is re-adding the hole for the back end of the exhaust, as on my model this had not cast. Here the kit also wants me to add the tracks, but again I'm going to leave these off to make painting them easier later on. Now it's onto the main body of the half-track. Before assembling this bit there is quite a bit of cleanup that needs doing. Feed ports, ejection ports and numbers will all need to be removed from these bits before they can be put together. Though there is a fair bit to clean up, it's pretty fast and straightforward to do. With the parts cleaned up, it's time to assemble them. I was dreading this bit, as the fit looked a bit wishy-washy, but after adding the seat backing to one of the main side pieces, the bits go together quite easily, as it helps having two edges to glue to. Then it's just a case of working your way around adding the parts. The more bits you add, the more solid it gets. This is how it's looking at the end of this stage. Now it's on to adding some details, mostly around the driver's cab. I found that adding the bonnet and windshield is a bit tricky, but the parts do fit into place with a bit of a light squeeze. Adding all the other little bits here though is an absolute doddle, absolutely nothing to report. Next it's time to make a little sub-assembly for the gun. This is nice and simple, and again, no issues here. That done, it's on to the final assembly stages for the M3 half-track. Firstly, I add the unditching roller thing to the front of the chassis. This bit's a bit delicate and will benefit from a bit of drying time. Most of the bits here go on easily. I found that adding the gun housing was the most awkward bit of this stage, as the contact points are a little bit minimal, and it's hard from the paint guide and box art to work out where to put this on. Best advice I can give here is there is a little bit of a lip to the gun housing that sits a little bit in front of the windshield. With that on though, it's plain sailing for the rest of this step. This is how the completed half-track is looking, minus the wheels and driver figure. Lastly, it's on to building the 1-ton trailer. The trailer is a fairly easy build. Before construction there are a few feed ports that need cleaning up, but the build itself is very simple. There is only one bit that you'll need to keep an eye on at this stage, and that's making sure that the front and back pieces go on in the right place. There's not much difference between the two pieces, but the back piece for the trailer has rear lights on it, so make sure this is the one that goes on the back. Other than that though, it's quick and easy, dash to the build's finish line. This is the model ready for painting. As you can see, some bits haven't been added to make the painting easier. Now it's onto the painting. For the base coat I'm using Tamiya TS28 Olive Drab spray paint. As always, I'm spraying this up off screen, outside, to avoid fumigating myself. With the base coat down, first thing I'm doing is painting all of the black areas on the model. The wheels are much easier to paint stuck on cocktail sticks. Unlike some of the other one-piece tracks I've painted in the past, the simple tracks on this M3 are quite easy to paint as there's really not much to them. While the black's drying, I paint up the seats and trailer cover in Tamiya XF49 khaki. Painting the seats in the driver's cab was tricky. It might have been easier here to leave the gun housing off in hindsight, and yeah, if I was going to build this again I would leave the gun housing off, as you'd actually have some room to manoeuvre. With those bits painted, now the wheels are dry, I add them onto the half-track and trailer. Before I forget which wheel set goes where. The bigger wheels are on the half-track, in case you get yours mixed up. Now it's on to painting the gunmetal areas. First I paint the headlights, then I move on to dry brushing. Next up, I move on to painting the exhaust and tool handles with AK World War I British khaki. With that done, I add the tracks. The tracks go on easily, but with them having only 2 points of attachment, I'm going to leave this bit to dry for a while so it's safe to handle over the next painting stages. This is how the model's looking with the basic colours down. Now it's on to the first wash of the model. As always for this I'm using watered down black. Adding the wash to this model was fairly tricky, as the Tamiya Olive Drab spray is not as matte as the Humbrol, and it seemed to not allow the paint to cling to it so well. Wash on, it's time to add the decals. The decals in this go on okay, but need some light persuasion from a cotton wool bud to get them over the small details. For some reason I always seem to have trouble with the American Army stars. Like with many of the vintage classic decals, they are a bit shiny though. There is also a little bit too much carrier film. The decals do add some much needed interest to the model though, and hopefully later weathering should get rid of the shininess. This is how the model's looking with the decals on. Now on the home stretch of the painting, I give the half-track its dust coat. For this I'm using my tried and tested Army Painter Skeleton Bone dry brush. This model really needed a dust coat just to pick out the finer details, as many of them were getting lost on the model. dust coat on. For the final hit, I go over the tank in a streaky wash using BS Dark Earth to add some mud to the vehicle and make it look like it's lived a bit. The BS Dark Earth coat has gone a long way in mucking up the undercoat paint and giving this half-track some interest, as it's a tricky model to highlight, having so many steep flat sides. Anyway, with the muck coat on, I think I'm going to call this model done. This is how the finished model's looking. I'm quite proud of how this little half-track and trailer has turned out. Building a bigger version of an M3 half-track is now definitely on the cards in the future. In conclusion, the Airfix M3 half-track is a nice kit. Even though it has all the traits of a small-scale older model, like having simplified details and a few slightly fiddly bits, the kit's still a fun and relatively easy model to build, and one that would be suitable for most modelers. Like with all kits though, there are a few things to watch out for during construction, like removing feed ports and ejection marks and making sure to clean off the part numbers. Also, building the main hull could prove tricky if you don't place the boxes on the main side bits first before starting the construction, as these bits go a long way giving you more surface area to aid in lineup and gluing. I wasn't the biggest fan of the decals in this kit though. The seam of carrier film was quite big, and yet again the American Star decals gave me a few minor problems getting them on flat. But the decals are certainly not kit breaking. I picked up this model brand new for 11 quid, and I feel that this is a fair price to pay for this model kit. Anyway, that's my build and review of the Airfix Vintage Classic 176 scale M3 half-track and 1 tonne trailer. As always, thank you for watching. If you made it this far, please consider subscribing to keep up to date on the channel's future releases. Until next time though, look after yourselves and have a good one. Goodbye.